Namaste. I welcome you all to Bharatasya Sangeet Vishwanubandh Yatra. It is an attempt to trace the journey of Indian classical music and instruments in interrelationship with world music cultures. Today, with us, we have Oded Tzur. Born in Kiryat Ono near Tel Aviv in Israel in 1984, Oded Tzur is a New York-based jazz saxophonist, composer, and a band leader. Influenced by the sound of jazz as he grew up, he studied saxophone under Gersh Geller. He then attended Thelma Yellin High School for Arts and the Jerusalem Academy. In 2007, he enrolled at the Rotterdam Conservatory and was the only saxophonist to study under flautist teacher Pandit Hariprasad Chaurasiaji. Interested in traditional Indian music, he researched, experimented, and developed a style that expanded the microtonality of the saxophone. His playing style was inspired by both the music of North India and the Middle East and is referred to as the middle path. Welcome, Odedji. Welcome to Bharatasya
So
Sangeet
much.
Vishwanubandh
Thank
Yatra.
you for having me.
So let's begin. I will ask you, what drew you to Indian classical music and how did you first start playing it on the saxophone?
So I think that the reasons were many at the beginning, and I wasn't even aware of all of them at first. But growing up in Israel and being surrounded by, as you said, jazz music, Middle Eastern music, other types of music that I really loved, it was very difficult for me, I think, when I was younger, to choose just one style of music and say that this is my native language and from now on I am going to continue on this path alone. I felt like the world that we live in nowadays is so vast and yet so small at the same time, because it's kind of getting smaller in that sense, that I was interested in finding a method to explore the musical phenomenon itself, something more universal. And I think that Indian classical music somehow gave me that. And in a way, that's maybe a bit surprising because Indian music obviously comes from India and it is just as specific of a musical style as all the other styles that I fell in love with. But I think that to me, there is something to Indian classical music, to rag music, that is almost like a laboratory of sound. You study the note and then the neighboring note and just explore what that interval between just these two notes feels like, almost as if you're under laboratory conditions. And there's something about that that felt very universal to me. And I think that's why it fulfilled that dream that I had as a younger person.
And did the pursuit of Indian classical music change something within you?
Absolutely, without a doubt. Once you set foot on that journey, I don't think that there's any going back, actually. Simply because obviously Indian classical music is a form of meditation, a form of prayer. That's what it is for my guru. That's what it is for me. And I think that's also another thing that I was searching for. An art form that is more than a form of entertainment, but something that is truly a spiritual pursuit. Um, for example, John Coltrane, the great saxophonist, the great jazz saxophonist, was interested in these things at the end of his career. And I think that learning from him, kind of listening to him and his music, how it evolved, pointed the way for me and many others. So it's certainly something that influenced my entire life, my entire music and creativity for sure.
So, while playing Indian classical music on saxophone, what challenges have you faced in adapting Indian classical music on the saxophone and how did you overcome them?
With a lot of blood, sweat, and tears. But the challenges were simply because my instrument, the saxophone, is a Western instrument and it has an on off key system, which means that something is either closed or open. And as you know, with rag music, the music is in between the notes, really in a very literal sense. Those journeys between one note and another are the heart of the matter. And I was basically trying to find a way to play that on the saxophone. At first, it wasn't easy. There are actually quite a few people that do that in quicker ways, let's say. And I was interested in doing that in an authentic way, in a way that when someone listens to me play, they would say, ah, this is music, rather than saying, ah, this is the saxophone. I was interested in being judged as any other Indian music instrumentalist, and not to be getting any discounts, if you see what I mean. So that took a while, and I gradually developed this technique that functions in a special way, uses the keys of the instrument in an unusual way. It took years to create that, but it gradually became a natural part of how I play, and I started teaching that to others as well. So that was more or less the process.
That is wonderful. Now, I'd like to ask you, how has Indian classical music influenced your work as a musician, and what aspects of it have you incorporated in your own compositions as a music composer?
So rag music is focused on rag, obviously, and the way that I've been taught what rag is that it's almost like an abstract personality or a presence that is sitting there in the room. Some musicians would refer to it almost as a god or a goddess. Some essence of something that is present there. The job of the musician is to bring it to life and perform a certain ritual, almost, or not almost, a ritual, a ceremony, through that particular form that is this rag. When I explore music in a universal sense, as I said before, there is one other musical art form that I noticed that behaves very similarly to that, and that is actually the blues in North America. The blues, when musicians speak about it, it has a scale, but it is much more than a scale. It has a certain personality, a certain character. It is so distinct, actually, if you think about it, that you just need to hear one phrase of the blues and recognize immediately, ah, this is the blues. That is exactly like rag. When you hear yaman, if a master play, that's what we say, if a master would play the rag, one note you would already know that it's yaman or bharavi or whatever it is. This is the same with the blues. Additionally, the blues is very microtonal. It is all about those journeys between the notes and these inflections. And like I said before, it is distinct. It is absolutely recognizable. So I have started to explore this phenomenon of rag that obviously was created in the Indian subcontinent and so on, as a universal phenomenon that you can find elsewhere in the world. So when I create a piece of music nowadays, I really go about it in this way. I start with creating a mini universe like that is akin to a rag. It is not thousands of years old like the Indian ragas, but it is following that same body of knowledge, if you will. Especially my last album, which is called Isabella. It's an album that I made for my wife, whose name is Isabella. And the whole album is essentially like a portrait of hers. It is imagining her as this musical personality that I invoke when I play the songs. And therefore, as you probably have gathered by now, the concept of rag completely defines everything that I do as a musician and also how I explore other forms of music.
Very beautifully put. Thank you.
Thanks.
Now, again, as a composer, I'd like to ask you, how do you balance the tradition of Indian classical music with your own individual expression as a saxophonist?
Yeah. Well, that's a great question. Obviously, when I play Indian classical music, I don't try to combine it with anything else. I try to keep that space as a sacred space, really, where I try to do my best to represent the tradition and the school that I was taught, with my teacher and so on and so forth. So that has a certain place, and I explore that as a performer and also as a teacher. I also, by the way, want to mention that I've developed an app for Indian classical music. It's called Time Seer, and it provides tanpura and tabla accompaniment for those of us who play Indian classical music in the traditional form. Beyond that, I'm also a jazz musician, and that's where I allow things to kind of connect a little bit more between Indian classical music and other influences that I have. However, that being said, I am not so interested in taking a little bit of rag and a little bit of jazz and kind of mixing them in a little salad and presenting that to the listener. I think that is a little lazy, for lack of a better word. What I am fascinated by is the fact that underneath Indian classical music and underneath jazz and blues, there are some things that are already common, that are already similar. And those universal elements of music really fascinate me. And I think they should fascinate all of us because it is so magical that in different places in the world, the same things have naturally evolved in different ways. So that is what I try to kind of shed light on when I compose.
That is wonderful. I would like to ask you, in all these years of you playing the saxophone and as a musician, who are your biggest musical influences and how have they shaped your playing?
Okay, that's very hard to choose always, but I can name a few. Certainly, my guru, Pandit Hariprasad Chaurasya ji, the encounter with him was completely life changing, has been. Every day I think about him and how he plays. You know, I met him being a jazz musician at first. So I was playing a lot of notes, trying to create these faster passages and complexity. And I remember sitting in front of him and hearing him play just one note on the bansuri. And it was really life changing. Every time he played just one note, I felt like my life is over and started again. So this is really maybe the number one influence as far as I'm concerned. In addition to that, there is, of course, John Coltrane, which I consider to be my hero as well. The way that he played within the traditional jazz music and then sort of left that tradition somewhat and explored beyond anything that anyone can possibly explore or reach further, really inspired me to think about music as something that requires the artist to go beyond your own capacities, beyond your current kind of peers and culture, what people expect of you, just to completely go beyond everything. So he's definitely an important person. I'd also like to mention Nikhil Banerjee, Pandit Nikhil Banerjee, obviously, and Ustad Zakir Hussain, Ustad Zia Mohiuddin Dagar, and the whole Drupad genre as well was very influential for me, and many, many others, but these are just a few.
Indian classical music provides the ability to emote various expressions through music. What is your take on that?
Yeah, I think that, you know, in a way that's true for every music, right? When we listen to any type of music, there are emotions there. If there weren't emotions there, then we probably wouldn't listen. But what I think is unique about Indian classical music, indeed, is that, again, there seems to almost be laboratory conditions there, where we say, okay, now I want to emote this particular sensation. It is like razor sharp, it is so accurate. And we try to embody that particular emotion in a very concentrated and focused way. I think that this is like obviously a very fascinating journey to be on, both because you can try to connect with your audience through this exploration, but obviously you can never connect to anyone unless you're connecting inwards. And that is where the true journey lies, as we all know. So when I play a certain rag, it is an opportunity for me as a musician to explore those journeys within myself or within all of us, within the space that music provides, and learn and evolve. And that's what it's all about. And if I learn something and pursue something truthfully and honestly for me, then I think this creates the space for others to also share that. And that's what music is all about.
That's a really beautiful answer. Now, I would request you to demonstrate uh, maybe a piece or something, that emotes a certain emotion or evokes a certain emotion.
Mm. Okay, I will. I will attempt to do that. Let me just put my instrument together.
Yes.
Okay, I'm going to use my app as accompaniment here.
Mm-hmm.
So this is what it looks like. I'm just showing you, um, and I'm going to take my tanpura from the app. Let's make sure that we can hear that. Is the sound coming through to you?
Yes, yes.
Okay.
The sound is very deep and enchanting.
Thank you.
It was truly beautiful.
Thank you very much.
I would like to now ask you, which is your most played raga? And if you were to think, what has that raga given you?
I don't know if I have a most played raga actually. I've played a lot. Excuse me, just a moment. I've played a lot of Yaman, a lot of Bimpalasi, a lot of Malkons, a lot of Marwa, um, a lot of Bhairavi. Um, and I think each of them gave me something else that is very hard to put in words, very hard to verbalize, right? I think that Yaman, for example, gives the practitioner a certain lucidity, a certain clarity of mind, and a certain calmness that is very hard to find if you are not practicing this particular rag. So maybe I could say that about Yaman.
Okay. And have you made any changes to the instrument to better suit it to play Indian classical music?
No, actually, I haven't changed anything in the instrument. I basically changed the way that I play it
Okay.
by treating the keys in different ways.
Okay.
Um, I can show you a little bit of that
Definitely,
if
yes.
that is relevant. So
So that would be the difference between the Western style of playing and the playing style for Indian classical.
you could say that, yeah. Um, so, for example, um, you can see here, maybe hopefully on the camera, this key here that I'm opening and closing.
Mm-hmm.
This is the high F. High F. That's the name of the note. Um, excuse me. It's usually going to be played. Let me just turn this on one more time. If I want to play that very note in Indian classical music, that would be Ma. So that is what this key is for. However, in my exploration of the instrument, I've noticed that if I want to play a slide, a mean, between Ma and a neighboring note, like Komalga, for example, on an octave below that, not this one, but an octave below, if I open a little bit of this key, it's going to help me play the slide a little bit more smoothly. That was one of those unexpected discoveries for me, because you would normally not use this key in any other context other than how I showed you. But what it does is relieve some of the air pressure inside of the instrument when you play the slide, which the instrument is not used to. When you're playing a slide on the saxophone, it's basically telling you, I don't understand what you're trying to do. You either play this note or that note. So opening this key just ever so slightly allows you to have more control over the slide an octave below. So that is happening with a very unexpected key in that context. So things like that have happened through the years, and I've gradually, made them into this technique.
Wow. Can you describe a particularly memorable performance or collaboration that stands out to you in your career so far?
I think that generally playing with my band and exploring the music every night on the bandstand is something that continues to inspire me, obviously. But I can tell you maybe another a story about playing in front of my Guruji, and that was when I was learning about Malkons actually, and I was doing something similar, a little bit to what I just showed you. In Malkons, there's a moment where there's an oscillation on Komal Dha, right? So we take Komal Dha, but we move it up and down ever so slightly. And I was working at the time on trying to do that on the saxophone. So again, the Komal Dha is, that is the note. But if you want to play it correctly in Malkons, then you have to move it up and down. And that is difficult to do on the saxophone, so I was practicing that. And I was sitting in front of my Guruji, and in one of those oscillations, his eyes were closed, and then he just moved a little bit. So that indicated to me that I was doing something right. And that remains to this day one of my proudest musical achievements ever, because it felt like moving a mountain just a little bit. The fact that he was appreciating the music, and actually I was very lucky. My Guruji really encouraged me every step of the way, but that moment was very special.
That is so beautiful. Does the breathing pattern differ while playing Western jazz and Indian classical?
Not necessarily. It's important in both cases to have a good, support from the abdomen in order to play the instrument. But in Indian classical music, when you use this technique, you certainly need to make sure that you do that. Otherwise, it just wouldn't work. So that's maybe the difference.
Now, I would like to ask you, how do you see the role of saxophone in Indian classical music evolving in the future?
Well, I hope that it evolves. I hope that we get to see more people do that, and for audience to have the opportunity to listen. I feel like the issue, though, or the challenge is that nowadays we live in a world where people really seek faster solutions and instant sort of gratifications, and the world is moving more and more in that direction, actually. So for someone to want to take this instrument into that context would take a long time, and I see that with my students. I have for example, one student who's been studying with me for quite a few years now, and he's getting beautiful results. And sometimes I get students that come over and they think that in 1 or 2 classes they would be able to just play like me. And when they see just how difficult it's going to be, they run away very quickly. It's like you see the person, you never see them again. So, like I said before, there are some people in the scene that are playing Indian classical music on the saxophone, but I really would encourage listeners to try to decide for themselves if this really sounds the way rag should be played, because just doing something on another instrument doesn't mean that you do it well. What my parents taught me is whatever you do, you should do it well. And that takes time. So we'll see what happens, I suppose.
That is truly wonderful. Now, may I request you to play a piece that is close to your heart for us?
Close to my heart.
Yes.
Well, the piece that I played just now was definitely that. I played, by the way, I should mention, it was Rag Bhairavi. what I played before. Um,
Also to note, this interview with you, this is the finale interview of the Bharatasya Sangeet Vishwanubandh
okay,
Yatra.
I'm very honored. Thank you so much. Yeah. Um, maybe I can play. Maybe I can play something from my album, actually, that is the raga that I composed for my wife. As I mentioned before, this is a different rag, and it's an attempt to have a portrait of her, like any rag is, in a way. In abstract, it's an abstract portrait. So this is called Isabella. I will play that just a few moments.
Thank you. We're truly honored to have you on board. So, thank you so much, Oded ji. This was Oded Tzur, a New York based jazz saxophonist who plays Indian classical music on the saxophone. Thank you guys for joining in. This yatra is in association with the Ministry of Culture, Government of India. Thank you.